Hi everyone, welcome back to part 2 of how to make tie-dye or marble candles, whichever way you prefer to call it. Okay, in part 1, the last video that you guys watched, I showed you how to add the dye to the candle after the candle was created and the wax was cool. Now I'm going to show you how to add the dye before you add the wax. That way it can be a little bit more creative and you can add a little bit more wax versus after the fact. So today I'm going to go ahead and I'm using, of course, Candle Science dye. I've tried other dyes, but for me, my preferred dye is the liquid dye from Candle Science. Of course, I'm going to leave the links within the video. So if you do want to go ahead and purchase the products that I'm using, you'll be able to do so by clicking on the links. I don't get paid for any of those links that I attach. This is just something I'm doing to help make things easier for those of you who would like to venture into making candles. And these are things that I just, after researching and coming up with different things and seeing what other candle makers are doing, I've pretty much played around and figured out what works best for me. As I mentioned before, your method may not be the same as mine and mine may not be the same as yours. And that's okay, because even if you follow the examples I'm showing you, as you get better with what you're doing, you're going to create your own method. So do what that works well for you to create the candle that you want to, okay? So what I normally do when I'm making these tie-dye candles and I'm adding a dye in the beginning, I actually like adding the dye to the glass, the candle jar. I don't use a whole lot, and I don't have a particular pattern that I use or any order that I use. I don't know if you guys, hopefully you guys can see this. So I'm wearing, as usual, clothes that I don't mind getting ruined. When you're working with dye, especially this liquid dye, it stains very well. It's even on my fingertips right now, and I just touched the bottle. So you definitely don't want it to get on any of your good clothing. So use something that you don't mind dirtying. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. I basically just take the dropper, and I may make a drop here on one side. Then I'll turn the candle, and I may bring the drop up at the top a little bit more, add the color a little bit at the top, and then I turn it around and I add the color in the middle. So I like doing it this way, but I don't do it that way all the time, okay? And sometimes I just do only 2 drops. So if you guys can see the pattern that I did. So I basically added it to the side of the jar like this. And I usually lay the jar on the side and I turn the jar so the color can basically drain and move on its own around the glass. I don't like adding it to the bottom of the jar. I prefer to just do it on the sides, because once we go ahead and we're using the glue gun, it's going to naturally move the glass, move the wax to where the dye is actually getting into that wax. So I don't worry too much about getting it at the bottom of the jar. So you have to remember, when you're adding dye to candles, you have to be careful with the amount that you're using, because it can also affect how your candle burns. It affects the type of wick you need to use. It affects how big, or whether you need to go up on your wick size, or you can keep your wick size, the same wick size. So because I'm not adding a lot of dye and I'm just adding, those little drops around, I can keep my wick size. And this is actually, trying to remember which one I used for this one. I think I used CD14 wicks on these jars this time. So it's based on the fragrance that I'm creating a lot of times. I know what candle wicks work best with certain fragrances that I've used in the past. And it's trial and error. Not all fragrances are created equal, so just keep that in mind. The first time you may get some right and then some wrong, and then you learn from that and just continue on. Okay, so I'm going to lay this one on its side, and it's going to drain the I'm having problems talking tonight, but the liquid dye is basically going to naturally create its own pattern or its own flow. Let's go ahead and do another one. And whenever you're using liquid dye, you want to shake it up very good before you get started. So this one, I'm going to only add 2. I'm going to put one at the top, and I'm going to put one on the other side, and I'm going to put it a little further down. All right. And then I'm just going to let it drain. Let it just slide down the jar and create its own pattern. So I'm not going to do all of these through the video and bore you, but I just wanted to show you how I do certain designs or certain candles that I do add dye to, that I want to create the tie-dye. I mentioned before, of course, that I don't make it a habit to use dye a lot. I only use it in certain candles because I prefer not to have dye in my candles too much, because a lot of times when you have candles that you make ahead of time and you store, because keep in mind with soy, the longer that you store that candle after you make it, the better the fragrance is, the stronger the fragrance is, because it's given it time to actually bind very well with the wax. So when your customers burn the candle, they'll get a stronger scent. If you make a candle today and you sell it tomorrow, it's not going to react the same versus if you sell it 14 days from now. So I usually create my candles, I may do 14 each, and then I have a place where I store them, and then the ones that are in the store, I go ahead and have those out. And when I run out of those, I already have candles that's been sitting there for a while, so I just keep it coming. And that's the best way to do it. You don't want to find yourself at the last minute trying to scramble to make more. I do run out at times. It happens. No matter how great you try to do your inventory, it happens. But I have a good inventory system, and I'll talk to you guys about that in another video. So let's go ahead and add some more dye. And then next, I'm going to basically show you what it's going to look at the end. So the method we're using to spread the dye and the candle wax is the same as the last video. The only difference is we're adding the dye first, and that's the only difference, okay? All right, so continue to add the dye, and then we're going to go ahead and add the liquid. So I'm going to go ahead and get the candle wax. It's melted down. I'm not going to go through the whole how to make candle spiel. We're just going to get right to it. So I did forget to mention that when you do the dye like this, you want to make sure that it's completely dry. So this can be, a little bit more time consuming. And what you're doing is holding the jar down, and as it drips, you move it. And you want to make sure that the ends of the dye, they do not have wet dye puddles, because you'll run into problems when you pour your wax in. What you're looking for is for everything to be completely dry, so you can pour it and walk away. And then you'll come back and go ahead and add your wax. So I did not wait the allotted time. So I'm not exactly sure how much this is going to run, but normally I will leave it for about an hour and come back, because I have other things I could always take care of. The less dye you use, the shorter amount of time you need to wait for it to dry. Okay, so when you're pouring your wax into the jar, number one, you want to make sure that you're not pouring directly on the dye. You want to slowly let it pour and let it fill the jar, and then you'll see how it's coming in, And remember, I told you I didn't wait for it to dry, so I might get a lot of mixtures of the wax. But we'll work around it because once it cools, it's not going to be as purple. It will actually take on more of the white, so that's okay. And here goes one. And then I'm going to let it cool. If you pour it faster, then the dye will definitely run. I'm losing a little patience today. But this is a method that you could basically play around with and come up with what works for you. So my dye is swirling a little bit, but I'm making sure that I don't increase the speed of how I'm pouring it, because if once I increase the speed, then it runs more. So let me finish pouring these out. Might have to make another batch. These are new that I'm adding to my candle line. I'm not sure what I'm going to call it yet. And I'm not sure if I'm going to keep the colors on the next batch. So you see how slowly I'm pouring this? It's running because I got a little bit of dye happy. And I'm pouring too soon, but we're going to make it work. Just remember, if you don't pour too much dye in it, you won't have this problem. So for a lot of you, you're going to find the first method I used was the best one for you. Oops, I'm rushing too much. All right, there you go. All right, so we're going to sit and we're going to let that cool. Once you cool, you now can go ahead and add the whatchamacallit. Once it cools, you can now do the heat gun. Okay, we're back. Let's take a look here at how everything looks. So you can see already, it already has its design just from pouring the wax into the container after I added the dye. So I did get a little bit too excited about this dye because remember, Candle Science dyes are very pigmented. They're strong. So I did get a little too excited. All right, let's look at the other jars. Look at this. And this one right here. Okay, so what I'm going to do is finish off the same way as I did with the part 1 of this. I will now take my heat gun and just do it around the jar. The difference with this one, I'm not going to swirl. Okay, usually I'll move it like that and give it a swirl pattern. I don't want to do that with this one, but it's up to you. You can do the same thing, swirl it around, move it a little bit, just to move that dye around. But because I already placed my dye, I won't have to work as hard to get it to move around. Well, I hope. I hope. Okay. So let's go ahead and get started with the heat gun. Okay, you guys, I went ahead and let everything cool down, and I just want to show you the final result after the candle cooled down. I got a little bit too happy with the dye, but it still turned out okay, and I rushed the process. But if you'll look here, you'll see if you could see that. See, there's a little design in there, and then the areas where the dye bled, you'll see it's a little bit darker. So we'll look at this one. Looks like a little purple cloud in a way. And I have some air pockets. Sometimes you can clear up the air pockets, other times you won't be able to. But here you go. Ooh, my hands are dry. See that? So you get pretty much different designs with them. This one isn't finished cooling yet. So as you're doing it, don't be afraid of the color, because while it's still liquid, the color is darker. Once it cools, then you'll get the true color of the candle. Look at this one here. And you see these air pockets right here? I could leave them, or I could go over them with a heat gun and let the air just come up to the top. And here you go. Let me know which process you prefer better. Try it out. Let me know. Use whatever that I'm showing you with adding the ink or the dye, and you create your own process with it. Maybe use a combination. It just depends. I like using this method when I want more dye and I want to give it a different design. Now, the other method that we used with, you know, this wooden skewer, I was able to choose where I wanted the dye to deposit, and then I put it all over the place. So either method I use, so it just depends on what I want my candle to look like. So let me see if this one cooled yet. This is my larger candle. It hasn't cooled yet, and I have to run it through a little bit more because I missed this side. Look at this one. It hasn't cooled yet either, but you could see the design in it. Try it out and see what works for you. And you just have to have a lot of patience and just trust the process. All right. Thank you for watching, and see you guys in the next video.